So I'm a writer, an administrator, an activist. I work at a public research institution called the Berkeley Food Institute at UC Berkeley. And I think I want to just give you a little bit of background on myself because I think it's the quickest way for me to explain how I feel that othering and belonging are core to our food system and core to understanding and fixing our food system. My mother's family came from Japan in 1895 to Fruitvale in Oakland to pick fruit, and we're part of an early wave of Asian immigrants to California to do hard agricultural labor, but they did so much of it that it aroused an anti-immigrant backlash, which led to racist immigration laws and racial exclusion on buying land. It was called the Alien Land Law. Somehow, because my great-grandfather got in a little bit early, he was able to buy some agricultural land in Richmond, California, and our family farmed and sold food crops and trees from Richmond for 112 years until 2017. So I grew up in a urban-rural farming context and got to see how the Bay Area has changed and developed and how, I guess, othering was the core part of our existence here. So we maybe never really questioned it until, as Tiana said, you get to college and you start to see all different colored vegetables and realize that the world doesn't have to be that same way. I went on and did my undergraduate work at Berkeley in interdisciplinary studies and food policy, and I examined the U.S. wheat, beef, and dairy trade in Japan and Southeast Asia, and how our foreign policy has sought to other countries, particularly during wars and after wars, through food trade, through the really vital, essential, a manna from whatever spiritual belief you hold, or from the earth, which is food, which we need every day, and it has been used as a tool by many governments to build and retain power. So I studied, that's throughout history, but I studied the specific instance of after World War II and the promotion of those three food items in East and Southeast Asia, so wheat, meat, and dairy. And I was so interested in studying overseas that I got my master's degree, also in Japan, looking at national school lunch program and comparing how these two wealthy nations, U.S. and Japan, have approached a national school lunch program, and particularly looking at the role of lobbying in the American school lunch program and racial and ethnic disparities in implementing that program across our 50 states. And it was absolutely built on the premise that Tiana just mentioned, that food justice may start with your wallet. It was thinking that food justice may start with our collective wallet, which is the U.S. Treasury, which we all contribute money to every day and has a big role in buying food and providing food. And I'm very interested in what kind of food that is. Who is it bought from? Who is it provided for? And does everyone have enough to eat? So that's my perspective, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from these activists, farmers, writers, scholars on how we can take out the otherness from a food system that, particularly here in the United States, has really been built on otherness. A few facts before I close to sort of ground what we're thinking about. Many of you will know this, but I think it's important to ground our discussion in the fact that here in the United States, we have more than 46 million Americans who are food insecure. We have among the highest rates of hunger in a developed country. Worldwide, almost a third of our fellow humans suffer from hidden and chronic hunger. At the same time, in the past 20 years, global food production has risen steadily at 2% a year. We ground our work at Berkeley Food Institute not from the premise that we need to feed the world, because we know the data that there is actually plenty of food and there is an overabundance of food and there is too much wasted food. What there is unequal distribution of food and actually more of a problem of overproduction. At the same time, ample research suggests that the industrial food and agriculture production systems are contributing to an ever worsening climate crisis because we have built our systems on a fossil fuel economy. And so we're now trying to figure out how to extricate ourselves from that. So after considering these intersecting problems of overconsumption, which leads to disease, underconsumption, which leads to suffering and disease, and climate change, we're going to try to craft some solutions together, helping us to, and we'd like your help to help imagine a food system and a food movement that is inclusive and responsive to the needs of marginalized people on our planet. And I would argue from the lens of food sovereignty, not only inclusive, but driven by marginalized people and are driven by concerns on how to save our planet. We're now at the point where we can't really afford for those to be second or third concerns. They're going to have to be first level concerns. So with that, I'd like to introduce my panelists here. To my right is Mamadou Goita. Am I saying your last name right? Okay, thank you. From the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, and he's based in Mali. Next is Doria Robinson, my fellow Richmond family member from Urban Tilth in Richmond, California, just up the road, a wonderful urban farm and food justice organization. And at the end, Eric Jimenez from Food First, world-renowned think tank, also based here in Oakland, California. So we're happy to have perspectives, both local and global. And I'd like to pass it over to Mamadou, please.
So thank you for giving me the floor just to discuss about an issue that for years we have been struggling with different activists, but researchers also, to make it happen. I'm so happy to meet Eric here. We have been conducting a lot of events and struggles in Africa, but also in your country, to try to push some of the organizations all over the world, mainly La Via Campesina, small-scale producers organization, in developing this concept, trying to push it also on the research side, developing argumentation and all these kind of things. I will just remind about some of the historical background of this concept of food sovereignty and come back on how we are organized today in Africa to face all these constraints that is created by industrial agriculture in our continent. Just to remind you that in terms of governance of the food system, there are some of the United Nations institutions like FAO that you probably hear about that is in charge of organizing the agricultural system and food system in different countries, online with some of the principles that are defined by the United Nations. So the 70s, this institution has been confronted to some key problems because it was one country, one voice in a democratic way, and most of the decisions were balanced by the third world countries that has a majority of the membership of 192 countries. A big majority were from the global south. And realizing that this democratic way of looking at the food system, orientation of the food system was creating problems to corporations. They decided just to push the creation of two institutions, the CGRs in charge of research things, but also IFAD. So you hear about IFAD, this is International Fund for Agricultural Development. That was created, pushed by the World Bank and other institutions, just to create a parallel way of governance of the food system. That was 74 that IFAD was funded. And as you know, every October you have the Food Day organized by different events are organized in Rome because all these institutions are based in Rome, just to promote what people are doing in terms of food system and or also to have this relationship between the three key pillars of the system itself, production system, the food system, and the trade system, because you cannot work on talking about food sovereignty if you don't have this kind of relationship between these three pillars. How we produce, what you produce, and how it's related to the food system that you have at local level, national level, international level, and also link it to the food, to a trade system that you are developing. So we came to 1996, a turning point where corporations were invading mainly the governance spaces for the food system. IFAD already in the hand of most of the companies, but also trying to invade the space of FAO. So they were just requesting the countries to give them space and resources to produce food for people. Because we are talking about food security at that period. It was strongly developed, and still it is still developed. The food security means that there are some criteria that will be developed. First, accessibility to food. Can you afford it if it's available? Is it close to where you live to allow you to access to this food? This is one of the key criteria that has been used to support food security. And another criteria is it is available so you can access to it. And if you eat this food, there is sufficient nutriment to allow you to do your job. You are a student, so you can just eating it, go to school easily. You are a hard worker, so you have also the chance to eat this food and then get it. But what he didn't mention is that how this food is produced. What is the decision and who is producing this food? This is why in '96, some farmers' organization leading the process developed this concept saying that food security means eat and shut up. You eat, you don't care about where the food is coming from, who is producing it. The minimum is that you have food. But it was very harmful to those who are producing. So this concept of food sovereignty came in '96 during this FAO annual meeting, used by La Via Campesina, saying that we need to develop another way our sovereignty as communities, as territories, as countries, as continent, to develop our own system. The right that we have to decide what we want to produce, how we want to produce it, and with whom we want to commerce our system, our production. So this is the concept, the basic definition of a food sovereignty, allowing individuals, communities to have a right to decide what they want to produce, what they want to eat, and with whom they want to commerce, and they develop their own food system, linking the food production system with the market system and the food consumption system. So relying on territories, but also relationship between different territories, and bringing together this relationship between the food production system and the environment, and the control of the resources by those who are producing, those who are hardly producing food to feed the world, and not leaving the food system in the hands of the corporation who just wanted to have all the land grabbing issues, narrowing down the genetic resources, using research on hybrid seed, GM seed, and now talking about a gene drive system that will be also one of the key debate in the coming years on the food production system. So if you look at that, progressively there are many debates that were open in a different part of the continent. And in 2007, because some of the government were taking the concept and using it in a reverse way, that it was intentionally done, mentioned by the farmers' organization. But some also corporations were using the concept of food sovereignty, justifying the kind of activity that they were trying to implement in different countries. So farmers' organization with their allies came to 2007, decided to have another meeting governing a forum that has been called the Nyeleni Forum in Mali. In my country, about 145 kilometers from the capital city, in a very symbolic place where a woman named Nyeleni has been the first woman in the Bambara community. This is a very close community, to allow a woman to be champion of food production system in the country. So this place has been named after this lady, and then organizing hosting about 800 people from all over the world to redefine and conceptualize more food sovereignty on line of some key principles that probably Eric will talk about. So this is a very important turning point in 2007. And just few months after that, we organized another debate. Eric and myself have been at the core group who have been in charge of organizing this meeting in the same place in November 2007 what we have been called the Agroecological Alternative to AGRA, the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. That was pushed by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with support of the Rockefeller Foundation. So we had some debate in the US, mainly in New York, contradictory debate with organizers of this alliance. And it's from there that progressively we came to Africa with an alliance on food sovereignty in the continent. That was founded in 2009 in Addis Ababa, hosting the headquarters of African Union and trying to move on research, documentation, evidence-based issues, trying to develop agroecological perspectives, that is a way of life, caring about the environment, but also in a sustainable way, how we can just make this link between what we produce, what we eat, and how we trade what we are producing. Not excluding all the commercial crops, but doing it in a very sustainable way and linking all this to the job creation, wealth creation, but also taking care about the territorial markets. So instead of just talking about this global market that is harmful to the food system, and we just realized in 2008 that a small shock at the international level had created very big mess on the food system all over the world. It's just because rice was a bit missing. It's just because some of the maize market has collapsed, and then we have this shock. So to avoid that, we said that we need to territorialize the food system and then make sure that you are not eating something that's not about your culture, because food is also culture, and food is mainly culture. So there are some of the kind of beans I will never eat because it's against my culture, but other things that I will be willing to eat. So this is the way that we operate in the continent and trying to fight against the system. So it's fighting against the dominant system. The concept is still struggling to find its way, even though some international instruments are just caring about it now. And the last one is a peasant right that was declaration that was adopted last year, and then including some of the key pillars of this concept of food sovereignty. Just to tell you that the struggle is still continue, and then we are trying to see how the different movements that were created all over the world can join the effort to fight against a system that is completely very harmful to our food system. And we need to localize it. We need to just join our effort so that we are recognized as those who are trying to feed the world, but also contributing to create wealth and jobs around agricultural sector. Agricultural sector meaning fishing, cattle with pastoralist groups, but also other agriculture that exist all over the world. So it's still work in progress, even though a long way has been taken to try to develop different side of it in a practical way. Myself, I have a farm that is agroecological farm, 100% organic, but all organic production is not agroecological because you can produce in a very harmful way. So we have to be sure that when we talk about agroecology, we are more than just organic production. It's how it's sustainable and embedded in the social life of people. There are some corporations that are doing organic production technically, but all the production is just gone out of the hands of those who are producing this. So this is not agroecological perspective. To produce in a sustainable way, it's included and embedded in the social life of people and the food system, but also it's creating wealth on the territory primarily where it's produced, which is why we talk about territorial market. So walking around, but also open to others so that the extra production can help to feed cities, but also go sometimes at the transboundary levels. So I wanted to emphasize on that, and I hope that in the course of the discussion, we can come back on some of these points that I've been raising so far. So thanks for listening to this short talk from me. Bye.
Thank you. And before we go into to other panelists, because we have limited time with Mamadou, are there any audience questions? I think I'm assigned to lead it off with one question, and then maybe we'll take one or two from the audience and move on. And I just want to know, Mamadou, what do you think are the most important things Americans can do to support food sovereignty in Africa?
I think already there is a lot that is being done via some of the network that I talk about. I said that more than 10 years ago, we were, at least I could see Eric every 2 or 3 months here in the US, because we're starting this discussion just to promote this concept in the continent here in the US. And I finally said during the last meeting we had, Eric and myself will have a contradictory debate with a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation representative at that period and the Rockefeller Foundation. I finished my speech and saying that I don't want to discuss it here in the US. I want to discuss it in Africa. So we organized a big event, as I mentioned, and then many organizations came from this continent just to discuss with us in solidarity about how we can operate. And I got a chance also with Eric to participate with some universities in the US, also trying to contribute, to conceptualize, and then have some more argumentation for that. So the solidarity is just how in your side you can help, because most of these institutions and most of the corporations that are compromising the food system are based in the US. You have organizations like Monsanto, Syngenta is in Europe, but the root base is here. If you look at all the CropLife members, CropLife is the big foundation coming from all these fertilizer companies and all selling the goods to farmers and then just jeopardizing, most of the things that we have. How can you contribute just to raise awareness of people so that they know that it's not a fight against individual producers from your country, but it's against the system. And we are all stuck in this system. It's a very violent system that we can realize that Monsanto has created cancer to some people here and now. Justice is going on its way, recognizing that some people have been suffering from that. So this kind of solidarity is very important for us, just supporting our fight here and there also, and then having also time to feed us with some of the information is very relevant for us, and then contributing to support what we are doing at grassroots level. But some people suffering from lack of resource, but also knowledge on some of these issues and continuously helping. So this is also some of the support that we are having from that side. That is very, very helpful to push, to develop our alternatives, These alternatives that are very, very helpful to show that there is another way of feeding the world than just giving our food system to corporations.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think I heard you say leaving the United States is a part of it. So yeah, I like that answer. Yes, a question back there.
We all know that one of the big issues that has been discussed in Yeleni is the dumping system that people have, because this is really a big problem that in many cases, you look at the food system, you are invaded by some of the production that you don't need. But pushing just on the name of opening borders and the international market, you are obliged to receive this production. There is a big example that we face in the Sahel countries. In the past, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad were receiving some of the grants from Japan to support agriculture. Sometimes it's about irrigated system management in some of these countries. But because they have been at the international level sued by the US, saying that they are not buying rice from other countries, so they are closing their borders so they need to buy rice to Asia, but also from the US. So they have been obliged to use part of this grant to buy rice, but since they don't want the food system to be polluted in Japan, so instead of giving resources to build dams and all this kind of thing, so they said, okay, we'll give you food. They transform the support to agriculture to a food assistance. And this rice is coming from the international market. It never goes to the Japan market, so going directly to Burkina market and Mali and so on and so forth. So we have been protesting so that they stop it in Mali. But Burkina was receiving, Niger was receiving, and Chad was receiving. This is one of the key impact that this international market is creating to all of us. You are obliged to buy things that you don't need. So it's killing your food system. So because importation of some production is killing our system. Because of the price is dumped, so the price is lower than your normal price. So it will never give a chance to your farmers to grow this product because they cannot sell it in your local market because of the price. So countries like Senegal are completely destroyed in terms of rice production because they are receiving 80% of the rice consumption from some of the Asian countries. The quality is very bad, but it's cheap. So since the population is poor, they don't have any choice that buying. Sometimes you send the same product over borders just to show that you are part of this system. This is why I said that the system is very violent. It's psychological violent, it's also physically violent because it's preventing farmers to produce the right way they want to produce because it's just cutting the progress of the production system in the different countries.
And that part of the irony of that, or the tragedy of that, is that the American rice industry is indebted to Senegalese rice expertise, and that now American rice is prospering and Senegalese rice, due to these geopolitical forces, is suffering. Let's take one more question and then we'll be able to move on. Yes, in the yellow.
This is a very big problem, and then we all know that South Africa has been a big problem for the continent itself in terms of food system, because this is the first country where we had the GM seeds. It started with BT cotton, Makatini, that you probably remember, that was the first open space for GM seeds. And South Africa is also promoting even nanotechnology with in the South-South Cooperation. They have been pushing with resources from the US, funding from USAID and some of the CGR institutions, just to promote some of these technologies that have been very harmful in our. It took a lot of time just to make people understand that they are not sustainable and they are very problematic. So if you look at the policies at that level, it's impacting all the Southern Africa. Policies coming from South Africa because of the size, because of the influence that South Africa has also in the other regions in the continent. So if you look at the trend, Zimbabwe and Zambia today, because I go every year in Zimbabwe at least once in January, you can see that South African system has been impacting because of the movement of products, because of the movement of population also between different borders also. It has been contributed a lot to have this supermarket with junk food everywhere in this place. So Zimbabwe was really very, very a country that I really appreciated in the food production system that exists in the past, but it's completely destroyed by the neighborhood with South Africa, but also other countries. Mozambique is in the same trend, because if you look at even the farmers' organization in that part of Africa, they are like most of the farmers here, industrial ones. And this is very harmful. So the policy level, we have CADEP in Africa. So this is a comprehensive framework, but it's completely, because the headquarters of CADEP was in South Africa, it has a lot of impact on the what we call the Regional Agricultural Investment Program, RIPE, and the National Agricultural Investment Program. So they are oriented toward industrializing the system in a way that is open to the international market. This is why regions like West Africa, we decided just to pull out of this system and we went for a common agricultural policy that is called ECOWAP, Economic Community of West African Agricultural Policy, that is trying to push forward. First, family farms are key producers, key players in this sector, and secondly, just to recognize that sustainable agriculture system, production system, should be the baseline of our production system. Yes, South Africa is influencing a lot. This is why also we started AFSA, the very beginning of the discussion after Bamako and Dakar. Eric will remember, we started just pushing South African organizations to get involved in that process. So we organized field visit to see that there is another way of producing in West Africa and Central Africa that need to be included in the system. But it's a very difficult system, and even on the migration issue, because it's also impacting agricultural sector. We just realized that it's impossible to discuss with South Africa. This is the only country in the UN negotiation on the Global Compact, that the only country that pull out from the African common voice system. So it's not easy, but still we need to fight, because we have very strong organizations like African Center of Biodiversity that exists in South Africa, fighting every day just to try to change the process, but it's not easy.
Thank you. Other panelists have ideas on? This is my favorite topic, so I'm so glad you asked it. Any other feedback before you, I know it's preemptive before your main presentation, but yeah, go ahead. We pass that down. Thanks.
Just very quickly, I think it is very important to have absolute transparency in terms of what's in our food and what we are consuming. That seems like a very basic human right. And of course, the industry has fought this all the way. They don't want us to label foods that have genetically modified organisms, for example. They don't necessarily want to label foods that have been poisoned with pesticides, what they call crop protection products. So I think that at the end use of consumption, it is very important to demand transparency in our food system, but we also need transparency in terms of how that food is being produced. Mm-hmm. What is happening to the land? What are happening to farm workers? What are happening to farmers around the world? Because there's tremendous amount of injustice and social and environmental violence that is part of the food, which I think has been set aside when we've focused simply on labeling of the ingredients of the food that we buy. So while it's important, I think we can't stop there. We have to look at the entire production system to see how it actually damages our environment and our society.
Yeah. Just quickly, I don't think I can say anything to kind of add on to that, but I do think that we're in a situation we need kind of a both and, we have to be working on the level of making policies and labeling and things like that, but we have to understand that those are Band-Aids on a broken system, mm-hmm. and that we really need systems change as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you. And I'll just add that I think citizens' ability to enact policies to control the most harmful parts of our food systems are a key indicator of food sovereignty. So I wouldn't say what South Africa should do, because I think South Africa will be judged on what South Africa can do for itself. And, this is why certain international organizations like WTO and World Bank have been so undermining, because they have said that citizens are not qualified to determine the food within their national borders or within their regional, bioregions. So I think some of the changes you mentioned are positive, because I think they reflect a citizens' movement rising up against certain, poisons in our food supply, and asking for those to be controlled, either in our food supply or in our visual landscape in terms of marketing and protecting children from those impacts. So I say good luck and keep going. I mean, there's one step forward, one step back. And here in California, for example, just in this past 2 years, we've had steps forward and step back in food sovereignty. We had 3 cities pass taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages, which is a way of forcing industry to deal with the health impacts of the products they're selling. And then the soda industry worked with the state government and on a tactic called preemption to prohibit any other local soda taxes being passed for the next 12 years. So we gained and then lost food sovereignty, and we're going to have to get it back. So I don't think it's done, but that's just one example of ways that citizens movements are making progress. So good news. I guess we'll move on to Doria's presentation, please.
Hi. Hello, everybody. My name is Doria Robinson. I am the director of Urban Health in Richmond, California. Sorry, my friend from Richmond is in the back there from the Safe Return Project. It's great to partner with amazing organizations. I'm here today, and I just wanted to, I was sitting here thinking to myself, I'm not an expert on anything. Here I am, sitting up here, about to tell all these people something or other, and I'm not an expert on anything. I spent the last 15 years of my life focusing on the question of food in an urban context, in my community, in the community that I was born and raised in, the community that my family's lived in for 3 generations. I know something about that, but there's still a ton more to know. I feel like I've come to a point where this term, food sovereignty, really is the best basket for all of the learnings that I've kind of gathered over the last 15 years. And I wanted to say that what I'm hoping to offer in the next, 8 or 10 minutes or whatever we have, is just a reflection on what food sovereignty means in a U.S. context, in an urban U.S. context. From my perspective, what I see, and I think what many of us see, is very, very, very few people on the land in the United States. Fewer and fewer farmers every year, larger and larger farms, more and more corporations growing what we eat. Even the small amounts of family farms that exist, many of those farmers are aging out, right? They're getting older, and their kids are not taking over. What I'm seeing is a complete transition of a whole population of people being in relationship to land, in an interdependent relationship to land, to living in cities where everything is very abstract, where food comes from plastic containers, and what we're looking for is the best price. And what we kind of define food sovereignty as, in the best case, or some of the best case scenarios for most people, is consumer choice, which is something different than food sovereignty. What I wanted to try to bring out with these moments that I have was this focus on really wanting to see clearly the system that we're in. Because I think we're still in the same system that we were in when my ancestors were brought from the continent here. The same level, intensity, violence of extraction from people and land is happening now under the guise of profit, right? The accumulation of profit. It's not as clear, people aren't in chains, but the amount of choice, autonomy, lack of commodification of people and living beings and living places is the same. We don't produce food to feed people. We produce food to make profit. And I really wanted to pull that out because no matter what we talk about, the policies and the different things we could do to try to make this really crappy situation a little bit better, if we don't really get at this core notion that the whole system we set up is based on an untenable amount of extraction, then we can't actually envision the system that we need that actually involves real sovereignty. So I just wanted to just underline extraction. Look for that pattern. If you look at soda, if you look at whatever, you see commodities, sugar and various forms of sugar being commodified, packaged for cheap. It's throughout everywhere you look. Where there's an injustice happening, it has to do with commodification, extraction for the benefit of profit. We will layer race on that and use it as a driver to justify what we do or what people do to us, depending on where you are in the equation. But what's driving it is greed, right? Accumulation. I keep also thinking a lot about the movement that my family made from the American South to Richmond. and how we don't often think about the people who end up in cities and how they got there and who they really are in an international context even. So my people were rural people who were on the land, found themselves on the land in the South. They were really forced by a number of different factors to the North, to the West. You know, Jim Crow, I don't really think of that as a choice. People were trying to get out of there. There wasn't a lot of opportunity. And when they arrive, mostly these people were poor, right? They arrive, they don't have anything. And that's what you see, I think, in cities, and I think we forget because there's so many, like, accoutrements, there's so many, like, things around you that you forget that you don't have anything. That most people who live in cities don't own anything. They're renters. They're landless. And outside of, you know, however much money you make at your job, you're probably living relatively paycheck to paycheck with a little bit of a 401k if you're really, really lucky, but many, many people don't have that. Landless. International context, you call them peasants. In the US, we have cell phones and lattes and all this other kind of weird crap that we spend our money on, and we don't even realize the situation we're really in, right? Kind of placated. So in my mind, as I look at the context that I'm working in Richmond, with our, you know, one major grocery store and 100,000 people and, you know, intense amount of disease, like food-related preventable disease, actually coming from this industrial agriculture that sells us all this crap in all of the hundreds of corner stores. You have to say that all these things are connected. That moving us, having us move, pushing us off of the land, off of real wealth, and into a space where we actually are subject to whatever it is that people want to serve us, and we have to pay for it, it is an act of profit making, right? It makes us so that a consumer is almost like a commodity itself, right? So we have become this new identity that's consumers. You know, we are a consumer now. The work that I feel like we need to do in this context, in a US context, is redefining ourselves. Out of this mode of consumer, that's all I can be. I can complain and get better things in my grocery store, and more towards producer. How am I involved in this equation? How am I helping to make these things happen by being complacent with the situation that I find myself in? I don't know that getting more grocery stores within an urban city where a corporation comes, multinational corporation comes in, drops down, and then extracts your resources while they sell you packaged commodity foods is the answer for anyone. Calories are not necessarily what we need. Sometimes you need an emergency situation, but it shouldn't be a constant emergency that lasts generations. So what I'm hoping to do is to say, what do we need to disrupt? What false solutions do we need to call out? One of the things that I've found, and I'm kind of close with this because I think we need time for other folks, is reconnecting people with land, even in small ways. If they're actually growing food that people eat, not just people look at and go, ooh, ah. I mean, that's nice. That's kind of like a Band-Aid. You know, it's a start. But when you actually start growing food for yourself or food for other people, there's something that happens. One, you understand how much work it goes into growing food. It is not easy. Not easy. Which immediately makes you understand at least a little bit what our thousands and thousands of farm workers are going through on a daily basis. And it might be able to begin to actually develop some empathy for that situation. So when you're reaching for the cheapest tomatoes on the shelf, you can realize that farm workers can't even afford those tomatoes that they picked, and that maybe that is an act of injustice, and maybe we need to reconsider that. In Richmond, with Urban Tilth, we have 7 different school and community gardens, 2 small farms. They're all on public land. It gives people a little bit of an opportunity to reconnect, to understand what work is. And not like the punching the time clock work, but the kind of work that feeds someone else's soul work. The kind of work where someone else's baby is going to be dependent upon what you did that morning. It's a totally different kind of work. And I feel like it's sorely missing in our culture. The deep disconnection from the things that really matter. When we envision a new system, I envision a system that is actually based on relationship. Relationship to other producers, you know, working collectively so the infrastructure that we need to actually get real amounts of food to people can be shared. We don't have to reproduce everything because we're actually not going after the same goal, which is individual profit. Our goal is to feed each other. We envision a system where the relationships are not just to human animals, but to all animals, all living things, even soil and rocks and whatnot, right? Because if we want to sustain on the earth, we actually have to be accountable to the water. Water doesn't care about us, you know, but if we poison it, that's all the water we have. So envision a system of relationships. For me, that means a regionally local system, because I don't know if you've seen a rice field or a wheat field or lately, but they're pretty big, and you need a lot of land to make some of the things that we eat. Not going to happen all in cities. I don't think that's what urban agriculture is for. I actually think urban agriculture is just a close connection point so people can reconnect, can embody the values, can understand what it means to have a little bit of sovereignty over oneself and your environment. And maybe just to close, because I want to move on, there's so many things I could say, and it's hard to get it all into one little package, but maybe just to close to say that for me, food sovereignty, we have this notion around sovereignty that it's connected to like kings, you know, like food sovereignty, you know, a little crown, and like, yeah, I'm gonna only what I want. And that to me is not so much what I mean by food sovereignty. What I mean is more an interdependent autonomy, if that can be such a thing, you know? To yes, that everyone within this system is responsible to each other, and we have a choice on what goes into any living being in this place, whether it be the soil, which is living, or our bodies, and that we don't have to ask permission or fight with a corporation, a corporate entity who wants just profit and cares nothing about us, to beg for something that won't kill us to help us go another day. But I just wanted to point that out. But for me, food sovereignty isn't this singular sovereignty. but rather a kind of dignity for living beings.
Are we going to do questions?
No, I think we should go ahead and then we'll do it.
Thank you, Doria. I want to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me, and I'm honored to share the table with Nina and Mamadou and Doria. I also want to honor the Ohlone people upon whose land we occupy, and I want to thank them in my own indigenous language. Eskerrik asko Ohlone, herriak, jasotako, arrerarekin, oso pozik nago, ohorre bat da, zuekin hemen, egotea. It's my grandfather's language, we're Basque. We have also been colonized, and we've also been colonizers. I want to honor the first part. So, in listening to Mamadou and Doria, and we've known each other for a while now, it occurs to me that oftentimes people look at our food system and see all these terrible things happening. The injustices in the food system, the destruction of the food system, the violence of the food system, the recognition that it is through the food system that most of the world has been colonized by white settlers. They start with the food system. The purpose of destruction of food systems by settlers and by imperialist nations. And so it's very easy to think that our food system is broken because it's not working very well for us. And I guess I just want to start my talk by saying I don't think that that's true. I don't think the food system is broken at all. I think the food system is working very well in terms of what it is supposed to do. I think it's performing exactly as a food system in a period of late capitalism is supposed to perform. It is supposed to expropriate wealth. It's supposed to concentrate that wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And it's supposed to pass off all of the social and economic externalities or the costs of the damages of the food system onto everybody else. And I think it's doing a perfect job of that. The problem is that it's not only unjust, it's destroying the planet upon which we live. The food system today produces up to a quarter of the world's greenhouse gases, for example. And ironically, it is farming which is sort of on the first victim of climate change and severe weather events, as we can see very easily in the Midwest in this country, or in our own state here in California, in terms of the fires that we had last year, the droughts and whatnot. So I think that it's important, and I think both Mamadou and Doria pointed to the historical foundations of the food system that we have today. And I think what's really important is what they've pointed out is the tendency of our food system, because it is a capitalist food system, to act like capitalism. I mean, it's not a socialist food system, so it's not going to act that way, right? It's not an anarchist food system. It's a capitalist food system. It's going to act the way capitalism acts. So that's why it expropriates, it dispossesses, and it accumulates, and then goes through that cycle over and over again. And there are different tools which are used. And we're quite familiar with those in this country. Genocide is a main tool to accomplish those objectives. Expropriation of land, the westward expansion and whatnot. The exploitation of different forms of labor, starting with enslaved Africans and indentured servants, and then moving on to exploited farm workers. For example, Mexican farm workers and Central American farm workers, or Caribbean farm workers in this country, whom we then sort of both victimize and vilify for doing the work which no one else will do. I mean, in the United States, let's remember that the United States could not have fought the Second World War had it not been for the peasant labor from Mexico, which came to this country and produced our food. And then when the troops came back from the Second World War, they didn't want to go back on the farm. They didn't want to do that work anymore, and so we continued. And there were policies to promote this. I think what we look at the very sort of dramatic and heinous aspects of this, what I call, the imperial food regime, and they jump out at us because they are so egregious. But we often don't look at what is not so obvious, the violence of the finance sector. And the power of the finance sector to dispossess, the violence of the market, and the power of the market to drive people, to ruin people's livelihoods, and drive them into abject poverty or off the land. And just to give an example from the history of the United States, very often people sort of periodize history. So, well, there was feudalism, and then there was sort of slavery, and then there was, free enterprise and capitalism. Without looking at how, for example, the tremendous wealth of the northern banks in the United States came from slavery, came from tobacco, came from cotton, came from cane, which was accumulated on the basis of the exploitation of enslaved Africans. All the wealth from that labor, all the wealth from that knowledge of production. Nina, I think you mentioned rice. We think of rice as coming from Asia. Rice came from Africa. Slave owners did not know how to grow rice. There were enslaved Africans who knew how to grow rice. And without that, slavery would have crashed. So the levels of exploitation which get hidden. So then we have these northern banks, and well, that's the North, they fought against slavery. Isn't that a good thing? Yes, but they received all of that dirty wealth from the South, and then used that wealth to develop the armies for Western expansion, which through the process of genocide allowed the 13 original colonies to create, the United States, from sea to shining sea. And I say this because our food system and capitalism have co-evolved. So it's sort of been common within what we call the food movement, which is very broad and very heterogeneous, and is everything from foodies to anarchist vegetable collectives. But it's common to think, well, we're going to transform the food system because it's so bad, and it is not serving our communities, and that is true. And so you see this tremendous flowering, particularly over the last 20 years, of projects, mostly funded by foundations, producing food at a local level, helping people learn to cook, really beginning to address some of those aspects of the food system which are most immediately damaging to frontline communities and underserved communities. And then from that comes a sort of a narrative of, well, we're going to transform the food system, because here we're doing it, sort of like one garden at a time. And I think that people we need to recognize the tremendous effort which has gone into this, and that it's been absolutely necessary. I mean, you don't just let people starve. You don't just let people suffer diet-related diseases. You do something, and people have been doing something. There's a tremendous resistance, and there's a tremendous history of resistance, which goes back hundreds of years in this country. Resistance to the food system, based on many of the things which Doria was mentioning, based on relationships, not on the commodification of food, but on the cooperation of communities to ensure that we are well-fed and that we are healthy. This is essential, but it's not enough. It's just not enough. Because in fact, as Doria pointed out, the system is still in place. And everybody else is running harder and harder to keep up. And so I think that the challenge that we face today is, one, recognizing that this is a systemic problem. It's not just a community problem. It's certainly not just an individual problem. And if it is a systemic problem, then how do we go about systematically to change this? Well, first of all, what kind of a system is it? It's a capitalist system. It's a capitalist food system. It's going to act the way capitalism acts. It can act no other way. So what do we know about capitalism? Well, actually, we know quite a bit. You won't learn about it in school, in this country. And even by the time you get to grad school, and no one still has studied capitalism. You can go through an entire course of economics and not know anything about capitalism. You know about markets, but you don't know about capital. You don't know about the formation of capital, the accumulation of capital, the flows of capital, and what that does, how that changes society, and how that changes the environment. So if it is a capitalist food system, then what can we do? And, well, if we look into history, what we see is that capitalism always does two things. It always, first of all, privatizes everything. We call that liberalization. That means the liberalization of markets. You let markets do whatever they want. You don't control them. You don't regulate them. You let capitalists make money however they want, wherever they want, and everybody else has to pay the consequences if that's destructive. So it goes through these periods of liberalization, and then things get so bad. So many people are dispossessed. So many people are hurt. So much of the environment is destroyed that people rise up and fight back in what's called a counter-movement. And then with the counter-movement, one has the possibility of introducing reforms. And the reforms come in and they sort of stabilize the system again, ease up on people. And then the system continues. So capitalism always goes through phases of liberalization and reform. So the last phase of liberalization was during the Roaring '20s in this country. You had tremendous accumulation of wealth. You had tremendous destruction of the environment. That's where we got the Dust Bowl. It was from the Roaring '20s, from the expansion of agriculture into places where you should not have been cultivating in order to meet the opportunities of international markets. So the grain companies were making a lot of money, and very poor farmers were out on land where they should not have been, and they lose the soil, we get the Dust Bowl. So we have a huge environmental problem, and then we have a huge social problem when the markets crash in 1929, and we get into the Great Depression. So Roosevelt introduces the New Deal to pull the country out of the Great Depression. Well, good for him. No, really, good for him. Good thing he was there. But he didn't introduce it on his own. He was only able to introduce the New Deal to roll back the power of the market, to deprivatize much of the economy, to reestablish public services, the public sector, because there was a powerful counter-movement in our society. Raj Patel and Jim Goodman just came out with a piece the other day in Jacobin where they had a graph of the number of strikes during the 1930s. You know, we're having 2,000, 3,000 strikes a year. They were paralyzing the production. They were paralyzing markets. They were not allowing capital to operate. And so then the capitalists came to the table. Then Roosevelt was able to say, boys, do you want a smaller slice of the pie, or do you want to lose the whole pie? Because this country's going socialist. In fact, it looked like capitalism was going to fall. And it was under that immense pressure, on one hand, social pressure that created the political will for the reforms, the vast environmental destruction of the Dust Bowl, and then the threat of communism, that reforms were introduced. And Roosevelt starts with the food system. He introduces supply management, so we don't have oversupply, which crashes the market. He introduces parity, which means that farmers get a fair price for which to cover their costs of production and live a dignified livelihood. And he introduces environmental controls. And he goes on and puts everybody back to work so they can actually buy the things which are being produced, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, the food system was a key part of an overall transformation of the economy at that time. We're at the same juncture today. So for the last 40 years, we've gone through a process of liberalization. We call it globalization. The entire world is being privatized. People are being dispossessed. We have tremendous inequalities of wealth, tremendous concentration of wealth. You know, the 8 richest men in the world today, you could fit them in a van. They earn more than half, the lower half of the entire world in wealth. We thought, many of us, that when Barack Obama was elected president, that perhaps reforms were on their way. Well, they were not forthcoming. And it's not completely his fault. The fact was that we did not have a strong enough social movement to create the political will to introduce the reforms. And we still don't today. However, I want to end on what I think is actually a very positive note. One, by saying I think history is on the side of those who want to transform things. Because capitalism is coming to the end of its rope in terms of this neoliberal process. Because the contradictions are becoming just too stark. And I also want to say I still think that the food system is key to introducing the larger social and political reforms that we need. And I also want to say that I think that those reforms could be transformative reforms. We don't just have to keep the same system in place. We can actually change the system. And I think that the emergence of the Green New Deal, as much as it's been ridiculed by even mainstream Democrats, the fact that it was introduced by a junior congressperson and has been so wildly popular reflects the desires of a growing counter-movement. And I think that the food movement is at the forefront of this counter-movement. So I think that the Green New Deal, in order to be successful, needs to not only address the question of food and the environment, it has to address all of society. We're going to need, specifically for the food system, we're going to need to control overproduction. That's what destroys the environment and destroys the economies of farmers. We need parity. Farmers need to make a fair living. Farm workers need to be able to make a fair living. And we need to internalize the externalities. That will level the playing fields. That will put an end to CAFOs. That will put an end to a lot of destructive practices if these corporations have to pay for the destruction that they're causing. So this will only happen if we build a powerful social movement. I don't know whether the Green New Deal will go through or not, but it is a moment for us to build a social movement in which climate justice, food sovereignty, labor justice, gender justice, and other social movements can come together in order to advance the beginnings of the reforms that we need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just quickly, if I can, if it's okay with you, Eric, and you can disagree with me if you want to, but I feel like that's an amazing list that you just said in terms of the things that need to be, how we move into this new set of reforms. But I would also really want to put, we need more people on the land, like more people in direct relationship caring for the land.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, let's open it up to a broader discussion, and right here in the sunglasses. It's an age-old question. It's not new and an important one.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many people out there who are actually going at the kind of psychological, historical context that keeps people from wanting to move into being farmers. I feel like what I would love to kind of like pivot to is more connecting the people who know they want to be farmers and don't have access to people like people whose children don't want to take over the farm. Like we keep pointing to that, you know, and there's a few small programs that are kind of doing that, but we need to be doing it on a whole other level and really ramping up the relationships there, because there's no reason in the world why there are young farmers who can't connect with land when we have older farmers who can't give their land to someone, you know, can't transition their land to someone else. Like we need to figure out that conundrum, and then yes, continue to work on the image or the understanding and the history of people's relationship to land. Yeah, that's
I completely support that. I mean, this isn't rocket science. European countries do this. Netherlands does this. You know, France does this. There are programs, apprenticeship programs, for young people to work with farmers who are going to retire to be able to take over their land. And the state pays for this. In other words, they see this as a social good. And land is a barrier in this country to entry for farmers, young farmers. They just can't get in because land is too expensive. Why? Because everything has been privatized. So we need to decommodify land. And we need to see farming as a social good. And we need to reestablish a social compact around the land and around farming. We need to invest in the countryside. It's got to be a good place to live. It's not right now. It's a bad place to live unless you live on an estate. Or you live on a winery or something like that. It's a very hard place to live right now. We need to make it a good place to live. Health, education, and welfare. The society has to invest if we are going to move towards food sovereignty.
Well, it needs to be a safe place to live for people of color and for LGBTQ people. And I, as an American person of color, I did not get to enjoy nature and the land until I left the United States. Then I said, wow, it's a beautiful place to be, but I did not associate with safety here. So it's not, part of it is not perception, it's reality in people's aversion to living in rural America. So just as an addendum.
It'd be just dangerous to live out as a single person of color out in the country.
So safety is part of it.
Right. And I also just wanted to add that, you know, kind of pointing to some of the systems that Eric was kind of, I think, referring to, the farmers that are trying to remain farmers right now are under an immense amount of pressure. Even the ones that I'm like, oh my God, you grow GMOs, commodity foods, like they're in a situation that I don't even know what to call it, because it looks like they have no choice.
Rat race.
You know, like it's, you know, they're under pressure from their loans and under pressure from the contracts and under pressure from, you know, the Costco's and the Walmarts and whatnot to do their practice in a very particular way that they actually can't choose. And that needs to change.
Do we have some question from this side, and then we'll go back to this side? Maybe here in the front. Sure.
So I wanted to say something positive. I'm personally just at the point where I feel like it's really a time for people of color, for queer people to build within ourselves, you know, and to create the kinds of institutions that will help us access the things we need to thrive. I feel like, for me, it's premature to be looking so outward right now. I would ask that kind of our kind of white allies, there's so much work for folks to do within their own home communities. Opening up space so that if somebody, you know, shows up in your hood, out somewhere, you know, that you've done the work so that there's some kind of consciousness where they won't be under threat. You know, like I feel like we have a lot of work to be doing right now in our own home basis, and to be kind of building up. And then kind of with that, I feel like there's a lot of things that are, not a lot of things, but a few things that are happening where people are kind of trying to think about how do folks like you get access. So there's I love looking at the community to community in Bellingham, Washington. If you know about those guys, like the work that they're doing with the farm workers who are actually starting their own cooperative farm. They're like, yeah, they started a union, which was amazing, and it's a Band-Aid. And what they really want to do is actually just grow the way they want to grow. That isn't going to harm their bodies. They don't have to beg from the owners, little crumbs from their table. So I look to more kind of efforts like that as where we need to be really growing right now and really establishing ourselves. And I really look to kind of white allies to be doing the work in your home communities, having those tough conversations, expanding, the political consciousness. Because race is a tool to divide. And I think many of us are under the thumb of capitalism. In fact, all of us are. It pressures people differently. Certainly, certain people get the brunt in a completely different way than others, but I don't think any of us are in a good way, or very, very few of us. Those 8 people in the van might be doing all right.
I know you had a question here in the purple.
May I say something?
A question? Okay, well, let's go to questions then.
May I respond to this?
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. No, I think that a big challenge for the food movement is to consciously incorporate activities for dismantling racism within the movement, within our organizations, and within ourselves. And there are plenty of tools out there and organizations out there to deal with this, both at the very traumatic level, personal and human level of racism. And I don't think that particularly white folks in the food movement have done this. And I think that if we don't do this, there's no way for us to converge in all of our wonderful diversity and become powerful. And so for me, it's not extra work. It is the work. And yet, if you go to the funders, they'll fund a garden, but they won't fund, a 3-year workshop series for dismantling racism and understanding white supremacy within the community. I mean, and we have to do this. And what's so frustrating about it is that people know how to do this. People have been working on this for a long time. There's all kinds of resource people out there. So we really have to bring it into our struggles. And otherwise, I don't see us moving forward at all.
Yeah, maybe just to add on a little bit is I feel like if we converge before we've done that work, then it's like a passion play, and we just act out all the things that, that we've learned unconsciously and fight with each other, and it all goes bad, so.
Well, I really wish we had more time because there's so much enthusiasm in the room, but I hope folks can stay in this room and in other rooms and continue conversations. I'd really like to thank Eric, Doria, and Mamadou for their time and wisdom.